What is up, you guys? Welcome to 10 Pin Life podcast number 14, featuring Chad Murphy, the executive director of USBC. In this conversation, Chad and I focus a little bit about him and his story in bowling, because I think one of the things that creates the most conflict within our sport is people just not understanding him as a person, as well as his story on how he got to the position of executive director of USBC, but then also dive into some of the more recent decisions, one to ban the Storm bowling balls from nationals and national competition, but also to dive into some of the decisions about the Open Championship that I've voiced my own opinions about, as well as some other really cool stuff. So I hope you guys like it. Before we jump into it, make sure you scroll down, hit that subscribe button, follow the podcast, give it a 5-star rating, like the video, share it with your friends, all that sort of stuff. But that's enough out of me. Welcome to 10 Pin Life Podcast, episode 14 with Chad Murphy.
You guys wouldn't believe this room before it was the studio. It was filled with all the historical VHS tapes, all the shows from back,
Yep.
And so they're being digitized. But you could walk in here and just feel the history of all going all the way back. Team Challenge shows. You think about USAMs from back; they were all housed in this room. It was one of those funny things.
Yeah. Bowling is so much more than what we see for a couple hours on Sundays. There's so many things that happen in this sport, and specifically in this building, as we're in the USBC headquarters and in BPAA and everybody else that's in here, that make this wheel spin, that those stories don't get told. So that's the whole point, is to just give people the opportunity who love our sport the opportunity to love it more, is really what I'm kind of wanting to do. So Chad Murphy, thank you very much for hanging out and doing this with us. Thank you so much for everything yesterday and letting us walk around and do some stuff, and honestly, for the invite. I'm honored to be here, so thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's so much, that you guys got to see yesterday. I hope you enjoyed it. Appreciate what you're trying to do and telling the stories, kind of behind bowling. There's always, the score is always great, and there's always a winner, but how'd they get there? And
Yep.
I think that's part of what you're doing, so I think it's wonderful.
Thank you. So, you are one of the most targeted guys in the sport of bowling. Let's keep that one nice and simple, right? You are executive director here at the USBC. You're the face of the entity. You're the guy that's always out. You're making the statements. You're the one that's kind of taking the punches, if you will. And when we met in Ohio, this is a story that I've told a couple people, but I have not told the 10 Pin Life audience, is, when I came up to you and we were in Ohio, the goal was basically to tell you, like, I know that there's a part of this that's missing. Like, there's something about the circles that I walk in and how a lot of the commentary or just dialogue is pretty negative. And I'm like, but everybody that I talk to this week when I'm here at the TOC and in the PBA Hall of Fame induction ceremony, it's all positive. So I'm like, there's a mismatch here. So what I wanted to do is kind of start from square one, because when you were brought in as interim executive director and ultimately installed as permanent, a lot of people were like, that's awesome, Chad's a bowler. And then something kind of happened, but let's go all the way back.
Sure. We
We kind of got to talk about it a little last night too, but what is Chad Murphy's bowling story?
Well, that one is, I think a lot of folks that we're talking about will remember that, right? I started, grew up in my grandfather's bowling center. He was the GM, on the small piece of the center. Grew up in a family of bowlers. My cousin Lonnie's got PBA titles. My brother, collegiate All-American. Mishka, my cousin, was a junior Team USA member, and then everybody knows Brian Wallachek, right, from Saginaw Valley, and then everything. But also in kind of the shadow of the Wichita State bowling program. My uncle Paul actually started that program, and then one of his best friends was Gordon Vatican. And so, when you put that together and you think about it, bowling's just, who we are. And so while this might seem like a natural fit to a lot of folks, my journey was not so much different than others, right? I wanted to, be a professional bowler. Got into bowling amateur tournaments, and then opened up a pro shop on the business side, and just ended up, moving towards that path on the business side, pro shops, then the manufacturing side, and then landing here. While it wasn't a dream, because I didn't know, that much about what went on here, but I was consuming all the goods, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you think youth bowling, and then how you go through that process, and then was on Team USA, the Open Championships, of course, right? Which, obviously I smile when I think about the Open and everything that goes with that. But good, but not great, competitive bowler. Got involved on the business side, and was fortunate enough to kind of have some people that took an interest, kind of showed me the ropes. Learned a lot on that side from some folks that were outside this industry, some folks that have been inside this industry, being able to listen to those folks and really progress. And yeah, when I got the job, everybody was like, I remember a few of the social media posts, because they were just celebrating that a bowler was gonna, change everything. I remember somebody coming in and saying, "Hey, wait a second, he's not a miracle worker." And that was a quote that I always, kind of gravitate to, because this job comes with a target, right? It's governance. Right? You think about USBC, we're a governing body,
Right.
And especially nowadays, if you think about the larger world, governance is divisive. But for the most part, it's very rewarding too. But the bowling for me, and starting back at the beginning, it was just so much fun. And then the competitive side, you just wanted to get better, and then just kind of progress through it that way. If you think about high rollers and very light PBA, I got my teeth kicked in by some pretty good rollers. Think about that. There's a little story about being the red leader at the U.S. Open with my buddy Dub Ballard. Coming over and explaining what red leader was to me, which was kind of fun. But, loved to bowl. Met my wife on Team USA. It's just who we are.
Yeah, for sure. It's that, and that's one of the things that I think I've noticed in all of these conversations is like the people that really just are just buried into this sport, and not in a bad way, just like it's just who it's, like I said, it's part of who we are. It comes from somewhere. Maybe all of us don't know exactly where it is, but some of us are even just born into it, right? So if you've got that much family that's included in it, it's like, well, yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, we learned to bowl from my Aunt Jeannie and my grandfather and my mom. Everybody bowled, and so it was easy to get excited about going bowling. I used to make the joke that, it also gave us a different perspective, because we also, there were no child labor laws back then. So, you have a definite appreciation for, picking up the trash in front of the center, and, running the line adjuster maybe before you're big enough too. And so that's another piece of it. I knew how to run stops pretty early on, which I'm not sure I was supposed to be on that machine, but hey, there was a bar return, somebody get it done. And so that's just a whole nother piece of it, right? That was fun and interesting, and just something else to learn.
So you got to a point in your bowling career where I don't know exactly what the overlap was, but at some point then you kind of referenced it, you end up at Columbia, and this was pre-purchased by Ebonite.
Correct.
So, and that's something that, at least until the day before Weston's speech, I personally had no idea that you did that. And I know that we tend to, you've kind of alluded to it in some of the conversations we had, where it's like, you just don't, let's make it with a story about bowling. But I think that is something that, when you talk about the audience of people that you had their ear in that environment, you've got the poster from when you had one of the best staffs for that one year. What was that like, tour repping out when they were bowling 30 weeks out of the year, and you've got to cover Marshall Holman and Pete Weber on the same season, and
Yeah,
What was that kind of like?
that poster was actually before me. It was in the lobby at Columbia that you saw yesterday, just so everybody knows what you're talking about. Columbia had a staff at one time that Pete Weber was on it for 1 year, and that staff poster was on display in the lobby. And when I moved from Columbia to Ebonite, the owners were nice enough to give me that poster, so it's just remained with me. But to answer your question, I always tell the story. Houston and Holman came out for the Tournament of Champions 1 year. It was my first year tour repping. But that's really how I came into that piece of business. It really wasn't the pro shop work per se. It was I was hired as a tour rep, and so I spent several years out on the PBA tour, helping caddy, and I had some people that really helped me then. I talked about Del Ballard earlier. I told this story last night. If it wasn't for Del, I wouldn't be sitting in that seat. So really, everybody on the internet that's upset about what we're doing, you should really take it out on Del Ballard Jr. Because him teaching me and giving me the chops to be a good tour rep is what kind of catapulted me to doing other things. But I've said this 100 times. At that time and even years afterwards, tour repping it's intoxicating. It was so much fun to be able to sit in a settee and one of the best bowlers in the world is struggling, and to work that problem, and then see them go and be successful. It was just very rewarding. While at the same time, it wasn't really much about the tour rep, because when they step up on that approach, they got to make a shot, and in a lot of cases, especially when you get to the TV shows, that's not an easy thing to do.
Right.
And so it was just a lot of fun, both men and women. But from there, moving in the office, getting into product development, doing some of those other things, it just progressed. I started traveling in the field, going pro shop to pro shop, selling the balls. Expanded from there to brand management. I started traveling internationally, so I went to Asia, and learning a lot of new things in doing that, meeting new people and understanding. But through that whole process, just trying to improve and find ways to think about ways. But there was always kind of this piece of me that wanted bowling to thrive, but I never looked at it as something I was supposed to be working on until I got asked to hey, would you be interested in coming to the campus?
Yeah, for sure. Then you get invited to the campus, and I that process again, this is another one of those things that it's a part of the story that I didn't know. I think I know more now than I did ever before, but it's also because of the fact that I'm a more involved consumer in the world of bowling than I think most people are. It's like, well, let's see if we can spread that story out a little bit more, because I think you're somebody who sits in the chair that has the biggest target on its back, but it's not because you're sitting there because it's an unearned spot, right? And I think that's the narrative that is going on that is so divisive is the question of, well, why is he even there, right? That's the question that I want to answer is, why are you here?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think if you look at the progression and you think about my history and experience in the sport, childhood in the bowling center competing, opened up a pro shop, opened up another one, ended up tour repping, so I've been able to see that. Product development, business side, you think about forecasting for the amount of SKUs that a consumer products group has to do. It's impressive for all the manufacturers and the way they do it. But landing here was just odd. And some people know the story and some people don't, but my son was bowling in a youth bowling league, and again, my wife, lifetime bowler, she's still very competitive today, and he turns around, he's playing all of these sports, and he says, Dad, I don't want to bowl anymore. And my first reaction to that was to turn and look at my wife and, can he do that? I mean, is this an optional program, right? And so then we started asking him, I'm not getting any better. And then we looked around and that program on Saturday morning, and we weren't teaching him, we were expecting, something there. And so I sent an email the next day to some folks down here, and I started asking some questions. They invited me to come be a part of a youth bowling day, if you will, where there were youth program directors from all over the country downstairs in a meeting room. And I sat there for a while, and in a lot of cases there were just reasons why we couldn't do things, and in some cases where we tried things and they didn't work, where I believed at that point in time it was all about somebody wanting to get better, because that was kind of my son's experience. And so I got asked the question, hey, we invited you down here, you haven't said anything. I was like, well, I'm not sure what to say, because I don't run a youth bowling program. But if I did, it would be all about skill instruction. It would all be about them having fun and using the competitive to drive them to be aspirational within it. And it was, this like watershed for me, not necessarily for the group, right? Because they're doing the work all day long, weeks and months out of the year. And some of the folks that I'm working with today were in that room, right? And so got offered an opportunity to come down, didn't gravitate to it initially, because I had plans on the ball side, but then my wife and I had a conversation. I was like, okay, well, if this is going to change, or if things are going to get better, whose responsibility is it? I just came to the conclusion that it was all of ours. Just working in the ball business, or working in a pro shop, or working in a bowling center, doesn't give you any less of a responsibility to try that pro bowling. And so I came in as the BPA youth director, and at that point in time, it was so much fun, while chaotic at the time, and we ended up putting the two youth departments through some good leadership here at the campus together. Instead of having BPA and USBC operate separately, we combined them. I was lucky enough to lead that effort. And if you think about some of the things that we did in that period of time that we were fairly successful with, growing junior gold being one of them, making some significant changes to Pepsi championships. We had some pretty significant league programs that went out at that time. And again, I never considered that I would be sitting in this seat, right? It was really through others that saw it as possible, that had taken an interest. And so when they came in and asked me about being the interim, my first question was, how'd you get to that? Right? But it was really through all of that led me here. And again, initially there were so many folks excited about it, because a bowler was going to then make bowling better. And I think we have in some ways, and others we're still working on it. There's just lots of ways for us to constantly improve, and that's kind of how we look at it. I think the one thing that we try to do every day here is just try to find ways to say yes instead of not doing things, because but that's messy, right? Because then you say yes to something and you go and you try to implement. If it's not perfect, then there's a critical piece to it. And so I think bowling is so much fun. If you think about the things that make bowling successful, right, is that anybody can do it, right? Young ages to seniors. But then with each given program, who do you want to listen to is one of the toughest parts of this. But how did I get here? A lifetime of being within the sport, having a lot of folks take an interest to be able to teach me things that I didn't have inherently, and then just making my way through it.
That's awesome. Is there a moment since you sat as interim executive director to today that stands out as one, like if you have to tell a cool story to somebody about like something you got to do, or just something you were privileged to be audience to in that role, do you have a go-to story?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's so many.
Yeah.
Right? When we went through the potential ball changes, and we were headed down a path, and talking to the manufacturers and talking to the stakeholder groups, we brought a group of pro shops in. And again, it was easy for me to bring a group of pro shops in, but pro shops really aren't a group that come in here historically, right? That's not a group that we really talk to. And the pro shops that we chose, it's varying size, business structures. We had, the devil's advocate in the room. You just think about always putting the other side in the room, but where they led us from where we were headed was an aha moment. moment, you know, and you're sitting in the room when it happens, and you hit the right, and it's like, and then we went back to the manufacturers, and you know, not everybody, but there was support from the manufacturers on that direction, and so we headed there. But it was really the pro shop guys, the ones that are in there every day. And I used to joke around the pro shop being the center of the universe in a bowling center, right? If you want to know what's going on in a bowling center, just go ask the pro shop guy.
Yeah.
Right? In some cases, there's some women getting involved in the pro shop business. You know, Carol Norman and Lisa Bishop, folks like that. And so they really are the heartbeat. And so it shouldn't have been a surprise to anybody that that group would be so influential. But the junior gold group that was in was certainly a piece of that. Some of the top of mind awareness things that we do, you know, when you walk in to a Strike 10 activation and say that whatever the Motor Speedway up is in Kansas City, and you see, you know, Go Bowling on the infield, and you're like, oh, okay. And if you think about how few dollars we really spend on that to get it, there's just so many stories, man. And then, you know, some of it too is just like standard operating procedure from before. You know, being able to, there's a lot of folks that think that I'm going to get enough grief that at some point in time I'll just quit. Well, stand on a stage in January when the Team USA is selected and wrap gold medals, you know, around, especially the first timers.
Yeah.
There's just so many things here that are rewarding that are a big part of it too.
That's actually a really good point, because you know, you bring up the putting the medals over, you know, medals around necks, and you know, when we were downstairs talking about the wall, that to me is the thing from yesterday that's actually standing out. Like, as there's a lot of very cool things in here, but that's the one, right? Because you think about the journey that somebody has to take in life to get on that wall, and how many people have done it, and how many people also haven't done it, right? Because they, like, that's kind of the pinnacle. It's happening again. I had a hair stand up on my arm every time. It's just like, holy cow. So like, you talk about, yeah, you're gonna take some punches, but also you got some gold moments like that too.
Yeah, well, and the other thing too is, and I appreciate you saying that because it allows me to say this, right? Think of all of the folks that had to help those folks get on
Exactly.
that wall. And so then you think about a USBC coaching department that has been delivering, you know, coaching tools for years. And you think about how coaching around the United States has progressed, but then also into the world. Everybody talks about how the world has caught up, and they have. But that was a lot of US coaches going overseas that were a part of, you know, this program. But you're talking about years. This didn't happen yesterday. It hasn't happened in my tenure. This was years ago that this governing body provided those types of things, and still does. But there's just so many of those. I remember when Spencer Rodevarsh won the, you know, U12, which, you know, getting that U12 competition to actually get accepted in the marketplace and have those, you know, younger kids be able to compete in peer-to-peers. But now look at him, right? He's Chuck Hall star tomorrow. He's a member of Team USA. He's competed, you know, it just is, those are the things that make it easy.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. One more thing about the role, because this is something that I've in other contexts, this is like my favorite question to ask everybody. You take on the job, and then you're a year in. What was the thing that surprised you the most?
Oh my God, how wide and deep USBC is.
Okay.
And again, I'll drag it right back to those folks that are on that wall. If you think about how it starts with the little kids and somebody coaching in a youth program, and then they progress, they want to get better, right? And then they start going and bowling tournaments. So you have all these certified tournaments across the country, right? Certified league play turns into certified tournament play. It doesn't really matter whether you come into the sport at 30 or you come into the sport at 5, right? You have the same opportunities. And then you have these tournaments that take place. And then if you're interested and you want to be a part of it, you bowl your local association, then you bowl your state association tournament. But all of these local associations across the country, I really had no deep understanding that USBC also provides support, you know, for 1,100 small businesses. And so that was another piece that was like, oh my gosh, are you kidding? And then the USOPC world on the governing side, and how the rules have to be consistently enforced and equipment specs. But if you think about, again, how wide and deep, that first year was incredible in actually learning what I didn't know. Because, you know, there was a long-standing understanding of a lot of it. but not into the nuances. And so a year in, somebody asked me, they said, hey, what was the big surprise on the job? And I always said lawyers. You think about how much time we spend with, USBC is constantly in that space, because if you think about the adjudication that goes down into a local level, two people disagree, right? Somebody sends a note into rules gets involved, interview one side, interview the other. Sometimes it turns into legal, and then are you following the basic principles? What's happened in the marketplace lately with the ball stuff, same thing. What's in the manual, and are you consistently following the rules? And so there's a large group of people involved, including legal. But that went all the way back to kind of my first year. Really, it was days into the job. It was like, okay, well, and then you think about the oversight, right, that goes up to our board. Our business is really strategically developed by volunteers, people who aren't paid a nickel. They raise their hands and say, hey, I'd like to serve. And they sit on our board of directors, and then, the staff. But I also kind of found in that space too, through others, that it really wasn't about what we were doing, right? We were taking what the people that came before us put in place, trying to improve it, so that the next group can come in and do the same.
That's a really good transition, because, and this is for all of you on the internet that are watching, right? I'm gonna grab my questions here, because I wanted to be really concise about this, and I'm just gonna, the reason I want to be concise about it is because I feel like I've said my piece. I feel like there's probably more opinions that I could put at you, and you could potentially address them, potentially not. But ultimately, you referenced equipment and all that. So let's just get the elephant out of the room. The decision is what it is, right? And I know that you and I have kind of talked about it in the past, where it's like the reason that you guys did the statement the way that you did is because that's everything that we could really say. But my question is, this is kind of sourced from a few different areas, but the biggest thing that I hear across the world of bowling is it's not necessarily that we care at a competitive level what's in our hand. We just want it to be fair. And that was probably my biggest point of contention when the decision was made, where it's like, okay, now we have a couple weeks for the guys that had something else in their hand, and now I can't. And in my opinion, and I've said this before, it was inherently unfair. Now, I'm not saying that you have to walk back your decision in front of me, anything like that, because I know you're not going to. What I'm curious about is, I know that you knew that was going to be your response. What was that decision-making process like? Tell me, walk me through that.
It's not as complicated as it seems, right? USBC basically has two markers, right? Competitive balance with the athletes and competitive balance with the manufacturers. Those are kind of the two marks. If you think about all the rules, we have an equipment specs manual that rolls up for the manufacturers, and then we have all these rules for play. Then you have the bylaws, articles of incorporation for the organization. And so it's pretty easy to follow those, if you believe in them. Which we do. And so that decision to remove it when we did, knowing it wasn't going to be perfect, and after, it's inherently going to be criticized, right? And it should be. Well, at the same time, if you look at other national governing bodies and how this works, the same thing happens there. For anybody that's paying attention, pickleball's going through it right now. It happened at their US Open. A lot of the testing that goes on and the things that happen at these championship events. Now, interesting enough, this piece of business had really nothing to do with that tournament. But there was a process that we went through, and when it became clear that the decision that was made was this path, it happens whenever it happens. And so there's really not a lot to do. If you wait a week until that championship is over. Remember, there are other tournaments going on too that are impacted by it. And so is the Masters more important than the Open Championships? And so imagine we announce it Monday after the Masters and somebody wins with one of those balls. Think about how many folks would have been critical about that decision to wait, right? And so there isn't a perfect. It's all imperfect, and so you do your best. to follow what's in the manual, and the timing at that point just is what it is. So while it's gut-wrenching and you know what's coming, right, one of my favorite quotes is, it's comforting to know that some of the things that are going to happen already have, right? And so when you think about that, that part wasn't as difficult as it might seem, but it was rough on the bowlers, right? The guys that were competing, and some of those folks are my friends that use those balls. And so you just know that part of it is tough. But as a governance structure, once you know and it's clear, you have to be decisive and you have to be definitive.
That was actually where I was hoping we could head. So that's a great transition. From a consumer's perspective, it seemed like a very short and a very decisive piece of action. Now, in all of our talks in the last 24, 36 hours, it was very much not a short decision, right? And that's one of the things that I really wanted to kind of highlight in this discussion is, like I said, the decision is what it is. It's not going backwards. But I do want to give you, and more than just you, the entire organization, some credit on the due diligence process, because even though I still don't like the decision, even though I still may have disagreements with the timing, and you're right, there's no right way to do it. It's still something that there was a lot of work put into. Can you detail out, because a part of your job is making sure that the steps happen along the way, like in large phases, can you kind of detail it out to give a little more context to the way that happens?
Well, I think everybody can go back and see the timing of the Spectre to the time of this piece, and you can see that there was some time in there.
Yeah.
And so there was more to it than just that. Not getting into the specifics of that, in the manual it calls out for a spot check. And so when a spot check takes place and then you get the results, you communicate with the manufacturer. But I don't think that the way that we went about it was really, that much of an issue. It was some of the misinformation that was created online by some others. And that really wasn't true. There was lots of due diligence in the process, as there always is. There's lots of conversation back and forth between the equipment specs, our board, the manufacturers as a whole. People asking, well, did you test other manufacturers? Well, of course we did, right? And you think about that process, but that's so could it have been done on Thursday before the tournament? Well, we're trying to figure it out. Could have been done on Friday, could have waited till afterward. The timing was just never going to be perfect, but there's a process to it. Unfortunately, it takes a while. But to think that it all happened in a day, but I think that was really just created, by the testing that was going on at the Masters, and thinking that testing is what led to this. And so people ran to that when that's not really what happened, right? The testing of the Masters was a urethane research test from before. None of these balls were part of it.
All right, Internet, if that's not enough, get over it. Because I don't want to beat that dead horse. I think I've been over it, but if we didn't talk about it, I would be a pariah. So.
And again, I would just because you said that, I appreciate it. I brought a copy of it in. Everything's in the FAQ online. So anybody that wants more information, but also, and again, there's folks doing videos and stuff saying, hey, my phone, it's there, call, customer service. We're here to answer any questions that you might have, but most of them are going to come from the FAQ. And so I think that's we answer the phone here every day. It's an easy thing to do. We've had folks that sent in questions and we answered them and they're stunned. They're literally like, well, I can't believe that I got. But most of the answers are coming from the FAQ. But how we take in the information is also important. And so there's a document that leads, this information, and then there's follow-up, email, phone calls, however that goes. But then there's also the piece out in the social space where folks are just running to go without, and then there's speculation, right? And that's just part of it too. Nobody's doing anything wrong. We just wish that more of it would come here, so it's more factual. Yeah,
and that's actually kind of where I wanted to go, because one of the things that kind of got this ball rolling between you and I was the video I did back in November or whatever, right? Talking about the Open and kind of my belief structure behind live streams and pattern reveals being kind of the two primaries there. In the discussion that we had yesterday, which I'm going to do as much of an overview of that video of that discussion as I can in a separate video, but the simple truth that I took from that is the listening to the people that are leaving. Because if we have more people leaving that are coming in, we need to keep people in. And not necessarily, like, I don't necessarily want to go too deep into that one because there's going to be more stuff on it. But that reception of data, right, is really where I'm curious about, because I think that is something where if I'm a bowler, I tend to flock towards the discussion forum, right, which not necessarily gets me nowhere, but it doesn't get me somewhere nearly as productive as sending somebody an email here or calling down here. And that's something that I'm curious if you can give folks a little bit of insight on that. You say I don't remember the number of calls that you guys take a day, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on just to hear everybody out.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's part of what we do. In those decisions, it's easy to say, and a guy I worked for a number of years, Bob Reed, used to say, "In God we trust, everybody else bring data," right? And so that's where I learned it from, right? Yep. And so you think about that. So we're constantly asking and listening to people. I had a conversation with a lady at convention last week, and she was asking questions, and I was answering them. And she said, "Yeah, it's amazing how much you listen to the marketplace, but people don't think you do." Mm-hmm. And we're listening at all times. I mean, imagine, between 4,000 and 5,000 calls into the BIC a month, and what those questions look like. The rules department, a couple thousand cases a year, a couple hundred high profile, but 2,000 at the beginning or so. And so we're constantly doing that. But then all the surveys, membership satisfaction, open championships, women's championships, junior golf. Think about all the things we're taking in information. We're thinking about ways to improve and what those folks want. But the hardest part is, right, which group are you going to listen to? Mm-hmm. Our offering, our membership is so diverse and it's so wide, and you think about what they want. A high-end bowler bowling the Open Championships that's there for prize money and to win eagles, when over 90% of the event isn't there to do that. Mm-hmm. But the other 90% is financially supporting the group at the top. Mm-hmm. And so the group at the top, historically has been the loudest because they are passionate about it and they care about it. I like to think I was part of that group at one point in time. It didn't act that much differently at that point in time, but if you want to grow, who do you listen to? And so that group in the middle, somebody, I can't remember where this one came from, but why are you always catering to the lowest common denominator? We're not. In a lot of these cases, we take this data and we follow it in terms of servicing the most. Mm-hmm. But we have to govern for all, mm-hmm. right? And so that's no different at Junior Gold when we get suggestions. The Open Championships got a lot of work to do on the Women's Championships. Mm-hmm. We haven't been as successful in growing that event. It's been better, but we have some work to do there. We brought a group of Women's Championships bowlers in. And spent some time with them, and we haven't gotten to that piece yet, but need to. Mm-hmm. But it's all, you just have this unbelievable ecosystem, a nation full of bowlers, 4,000, bowling centers, and people bowling every Tuesday night, every Thursday morning. And you just think about that, and so who do you want to listen to? Mm-hmm. And we try to listen to everybody. And then assimilate the data in a way that'll give us a path forward. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. And the nice part about that too is you, in our discussion yesterday, you didn't really put your own inference on pretty much anything. It was like, this is the data, right? Which the nice part about that is it's all available for you that are curious. It's in the description, so just scroll down. I'll link it for you. We'll do all the work for you. But again, I still think that a part of that, and I'm still processing kind of what my thoughts are on the whole thing. I'm not 100% on your side quite yet, sure, if I ever get there, but I appreciate the fact that it's similar to the equipment stuff. It's like there's just so much of this work that goes into it, and so many people that touch it and that really care about it is really the thing that I really wanted to highlight, because from an outside perspective, when you live a couple thousand miles away, it's really hard to have that context. And I'm sure even from here, it's really hard to communicate the amount of context that goes into it. But it is important. It's important for people to know the amount of work that does go into that decision-making process, the number of people that actually get to touch it before it happens, that sort of thing.
If I could, 2 more things there, right? The social media has changed the world, right? You
Yeah.
think about the information. We learn a lot of things by listening to social media too, and that's going to be a rallying cry now for some folks to keep doing what they're doing. But at the same time, we listen there too. But the kind of fascinating piece about how you started this and where we're at today, like, I want to go back to when I was the interim. So Chad Murphy, the bowler, would likely have never supported a 3rd division at the Open Championships, right? And so you had all these folks that said, okay, a bowler's getting in that spot, he's going to support the bowlers. And so to those folks now, even by adding a 3rd division, I look like a traitor. Right? But the thing that everybody has to understand is it's not about Chad Murphy, the bowler. It's not about any one individual bowler. It's about all of the bowlers. And so when you get on the business side of it and you say, it could be said, well, how do I support the highest end bowlers that I can? And that would be by growing the tournament in the middle, right? But it doesn't necessarily translate to that. And so there's this big piece, but how could he do that? He never believed that before he was sitting in that seat. But yet it's so obvious that that's where the tournament needed to go. And so I hope that makes sense if you really think about it in those terms. But it also isn't about any one person. I'm sitting in the seat, and it's nice that the arrows come my way and not at the rest of our staff. But there's so many folks involved in this, including all the stakeholder groups that we bring in, and people are really critical that we're not transparent about those people that sit in the room. Well, imagine what happens to me in the space, and now we're doing it to volunteers. Would we ever have volunteers volunteering for that behavior in the future?
Right.
So,
yeah.
And I joke around all the time. Folks want us to be more transparent, and we are. If you look at the way we operated this business 10 years ago and the way we do it today, there's a lot of things that we've improved. The minutes of our board meeting are online, the annual report, state of the association in the middle of the year. There's all of these things that we are doing more in being transparent. But in most cases, all that does is for people to want more, right? And so we just do our best.
Yeah, it's a step in the right direction, right? But sometimes when you see that movement, then it's like, all right, how do we jump? I can.
And some
can
folks that
empathize
want
with
the transparency, if they actually got some of the things they wanted, they'd realize, well, I wish they hadn't done that.
Exactly. All right, so this is another thing that I think that because it being a relatively vague piece of marketing can sometimes be something that people just infer their own opinions on it, and right, because USBC, a future for the sport, right? And I like it as a tagline, but it is very wide open. When you think about the diversity of the market, like if you're trying to say, okay, it's a future for the sport for 1 million people, that can mean a lot of different things.
Right.
To Chad Murphy, what does a future for the sport mean?
Well, I think it goes back to that development ladder that I talked about earlier. And so more honing in on that ladder and having something for the little kids and then the next group up, and then maintaining some of the great programs that we have in junior gold. But also, the top of the youth chain is the collegiate division. And even though NCAA and NAIA have come in, it's been wonderful for bowling. Ours is kind of the melting pot of those programs, and then also NJCAA, and then all the club groups. And there's even a club championship now, right? And so that world has gotten more diverse. But if you think about that ladder, and then how do they step into adult leagues, and how do they step into the Open Championships or a USBC state tournament or a USBC local tournament? I said this at convention last week. I love this time of year because you think about everything that's going on in the field at this time of the year. Our national tournaments, of course, are booming, and PWBA is part of that. And so you think about that loop, and then all the way through to the professional ranks. Not everybody's going to get there, right? But that's the truest part of the sport, right? Is the PBA and the PWBA. But the idea that we have 50,000 people bowling the Open Championships and competing for eagles there is a piece of it too. And so really a future for the sport means support through that development ladder, through the entire ecosystem, so we have something for everybody. whatever they choose. And so that's very different for an 86-year-old woman or man that's bowling in a senior league at 10 a.m. on Thursday than it is for Shannon O'Keefe, right? But we have to be there. And then also as part of it is protecting it through the governance. And so moving from that development ladder over, having rules, having standards of play, having equipment specs to balance the manufacturers, all of that kind of fits into this, smash burger, if you will, right? And you just think about that. What does it look like? And so for me, it's just turning all of the dials enough to make sure that we're supporting. There's a lot of folks that say we've given up on leagues. And it's really not true if you think about all the support that we do for leagues here. But in a lot of cases, people don't see it until it happens to them, right? And that's the hardest part. But a future for this work, for me, is just being able to impact the dials in a way so that all those million bowlers can enjoy this sport in a way that makes sense to them. And some of them, it just may be family and friends. It may be a grandfather taking a son bowling, or a grandmother taking a grandson or granddaughter bowling. Bringing PWBA back was a big piece of that, where there were lots of folks that said, hey, why are you spending money, membership money to bring PWBA back? And a lot of folks believed that it was about Shannon O'Keefe and Steph Johnson, and it was, but it was when they were 7.
Right.
Right? And so when you think about that, I mean, if we want those little girls that are in our bowling centers to want to be Mia Hamm, we can do that. But if we want them to be, Brianna Cote, we can do that too.
Right.
And I think that's the hardest part of this. But for me, it's about being able to have folks experience this for what they would like it to be. And that means a lot of different things.
Yeah, for sure. And it's because it's the one sport that I can think of that has that much variety in a competitive landscape. In doing so on the same playing field, for the most part.
And to your point, I mean, what does a 5-year-old want, a 15-year-old want, a 35-year-old want, a 60-year-old? And again, who services that? What we're doing here is just servicing the locals, right? The locals, with that bowling center, those 4 walls, wherever it is, that's where it all happens. Right? Yeah, we have a national tournament that things happen there, and we support it. It's a big fundraiser for the organization, so the dollars go back to do these other things like PWBA tournaments. But at the same time, all of this happens locally. And so can we help educate coaches?
Yep.
Yeah, can we help educate youth directors? Can we help run better programs? Or do we just trust the folks in the field to be out there and do it and take the resources when they're here? But it's all just about servicing, when I came in, there was a lot of talk, local, state, national, bowling center, right? It's one association. There aren't multiple associations here, right? We're here servicing a membership to just try to build and evolve and improve.
We'll change of pace a little bit because I'm curious. This is my favorite question that I ask everybody that I ever talk to. You've actually referenced him a couple times, in 25-year-old Chad Murphy. If you had to give a piece of advice to 25-year-old Chad Murphy today, what would it be?
Today sets up tomorrow. Because I don't think I knew that at that time. If you think about who I was at that time and the way I operated, I cared about probably one thing, which was whether my ball was striking. But I had no idea that some of these other things were going to be things that I was doing. But I say it to my kids all the time. I ask them, every day when they say, hey, what'd you learn today? And that was something that I wish I would have been doing at the time. Amazingly, I was learning and listening and paying attention, but I didn't really know what I was doing at that time. So I think the message there is that, hey, today is really setting up tomorrow. And it's not as much about what's happening right now. Is what we're doing today in the best interest of tomorrow? And at 25, I did not have a comprehension of that. 22, I didn't have a comprehension of that. Probably didn't even really think about it too much till I met my wife.
Yeah. I can relate. No, that's a good segue because you talk about today sets up tomorrow, and that was actually where I was kind of hoping to finish this conversation. What are you looking forward to? I don't know if you can necessarily what's coming down the pipeline here, or even just for yourself, kind of what you're excited about and what's going on. But what can we look forward to?
I'm excited right now about PWBA kicking off this weekend.
Yeah, for sure.
It's been a while, and I'm looking forward to seeing them, but then also thinking about what that looks like 10 years from now, as opposed to just today. This entire summer, we've got a program we're launching in the youth area at Bowl Expo that I'm very excited about, and I think will be great for the marketplace. Our friends at BPA are looking at a league activation. We're kind of doing it collectively that I'm excited about. But again, what does it mean, next year and the following year? All of these things evolve over time. People like me come and go, and if you think about that and how that works, I'm just excited about continuing to try to figure out ways to help this sport. And again, I didn't say this company, this association, this business, but just continuing to find a way to help the sport improve. There's so many outside forces that are impacting the sport and putting it into some cases of decline, even though we're growing in some of the program areas, right? And so, what can we do in the next, few weeks and months to plan for something next year? Because we already know what we're doing this year, right? We really kind of shifted things through COVID. I'm excited to be closer to the end of that
for sure.
in the beginning. And so really what's next is what we're thinking about now.
Yeah, no, that's exciting. It was a very good segue to think about today sets up tomorrow for sure. So last thing that I want to say, and this is maybe this is just me talking to the audience that's listening. I walked into this week thinking that we would have more active disagreements than we did. Because I tend to be a relatively disagreeable person on things that I have opinions about, and I'm typically I'm not afraid to say them. And I feel like I've voiced everything in terms of concerns, and I just want to give you some credit in actually receiving them very well and answering the questions that me and my friend Nick have had. Maybe not necessarily forcing us to shape our opinions around what's happening and all that, and like trying to get us all on the same page, but I've been very thankful for how everything has gone. So thank you very much. Like you kind of said before, there are vehicles for people to communicate with you and with the organization on what it is that they would like to see. I would encourage you all to do that. Because my experience has said in the last couple days here that you'll listen. Maybe not necessarily shape the entire organization around what somebody's opinion is, but at the very least it'll be heard. So I want to give you a lot of credit on that and appreciate that, because I've played a lot of different sports, and maybe I don't love any of them quite as much as I love bowling, but I don't know any of the other sports that listen quite as much as we do. And I'm glad that you were able to kind of illustrate that, so thank you very much.
Can I just say one thing to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's okay to disagree, right? As a contrarian, in nature too, the way things improve is to look at something and say, okay, well, I don't like this about it, and then to try to make it better. And so if you're willing to take that in from everywhere, it can get confusing. But at the same time, we're willing to do it because we know it's imperfect.
Yep.
And so you never know where it's going to come from. And so if you think about that, 817-819-7704. We've been answering. I even answer the spam calls because I don't know if it's a number call. That's how much we answer the phone around here.
Yeah.
It really is that easy.
Yeah.
And so we're just always available. Every time I see somebody in a video or on Facebook that says, well, I have some questions to ask. And I think, okay, well, I'm just going to wait here for the phone to ring because it's the easiest way to get the answers. But at the same time, don't feel like when you're making a call that you can't disagree. Right? Because there's likely to be improvement from that, even if it's just in an information exchange. And so I just think it's inherent. And so I appreciate you doing it. When we were in the room yesterday, right, I felt confident in going through the information we were giving you, not because we were going to convince you that you were just going to be better informed. And not like you were misinformed. It was an opinion that you had. All of these things. Who's the expert and where does it come from? No different than that story I told about the pro shops.
Yep.
Right? They put us on a completely different path, but we were willing to take it in.
Yep.
And the biggest part of this is, are you willing to communicate? Right? Because it's one thing to go out on the internet and just, cause a little bit of trouble. It's a whole other thing to be able to raise a hand and get involved. A lot of these great things come from people that maybe didn't agree in the beginning, but then decided to get in and change things from the inside instead of throwing stones from the outside.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
We're willing to do it.
Yeah.
We're willing to engage and have a dialogue. So I appreciate you guys making the trip.
Yeah.
It's not everybody that's willing to do that. When I sent the email, we didn't know where you were coming.
No,
And it's funny how when we invited you to be here, right, it was before any of the, kind of messy things happened in the marketplace, but yet you're still here and you were still willing to come.
Yeah, no, I'm excited that we got to come. It was a very awesome trip to be able to see everything that's here. I would recommend anybody that can come down here, come see it. There's a lot of cool stuff that happens down here. So, Chad Murphy,
Thanks, man.
thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thanks, man.